Welcome. We'll let people filter in. I know it takes a few minutes for attendees to join. So thanks for your patience and thank you for celebrating with us. We have a lot to celebrate with Thousand Languages, and you're really in for quite a special treat with some original authors in Hayden's Ferry Review, as well as some excellent translators. So hang tight. We'll get started in just a minute or two. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'll stop my share. You can see we have 41 participants, so very exciting. Thank you all for spending your evening with us. I don't know if you're having dinner while listening in or just tuning in, wherever you may be, but thank you so much for joining us. I'll get started. All right. Hello, I am Jacqueline Balderrama, the current Piper Fellow in Residence at ASU. Welcome to the Thousand Languages virtual launch celebration. Thousand Languages is a living, ever-developing database featuring translations of work previously published in Hayden's Ferry Review, transformed from its original English into manifold world languages. Tonight, we celebrate the launch of our website, the completion of our first two issues, Languages Across Borders, under supervising editor Katie Berta, and Transcending the Body under my supervision, as well as the excellent work of our graduate and undergraduate intern translators. HFR senior editor Susan Nguyen and myself will be sharing relevant information and links in the chat throughout the evening, beginning with tonight's schedule. The HFR Fall Language Series consists of two educational programs centered on increasing accessibility to HFR's archive of printed work, discussing the importance of literary translation and its ethics, and introducing participants to new modes of writing and literary craft. Our next event, the HFR Coffee Chat, will take place next week on November 1st. These programs were made possible by AZ Humanities. Outside the series, we also have a number of opportunities for ASU students, including internships and the Club Translation Challenge that will highlight student-run organizations and communities on campus. Please see the chat for details. I'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to all the people who have made Thousand Languages and tonight's event possible. I'll share my screen in just a moment so you can see a little bit of all the people who've contributed to this very collaborative project. Let me go ahead and share. So a big thank you to everyone who contributed to our first issue, Languages Across Borders, and especially all the language reviewers. And also to our second issue, Transcending the Body, and all our language reviewers there. Let me get back to my notes. All right. Let's see. The language reviewers you saw, many of whom are faculty and instructors from ASU School of International Letters and Cultures. Katie Berta was the supervising editor for HFR and Thousand Languages, who worked with an initial group of graduate translators and did so much to create a strong foundation for the project. Additionally, I'd like to thank the Dean of Humanities, Jeffrey Cohen, for his support of this project, without which Thousand Languages would not be possible. Hayden's Ferry Review and Thousand Languages acknowledge the 22 Native nations that have inhabited this land for centuries. Arizona State University's 4 campuses are located on the Salt River Valley, and ancestral territories of Indigenous people, including the Acamel Athem and Piaposh Indian communities, whose care and keeping of these lands allows us to be here today. We know that a land acknowledgement without action is not sufficient and are making efforts toward equitable practices most immediately by waiving the submission fee for all Indigenous writers or artists who would like to submit creative work to HFR. If you identify as Indigenous, we encourage you to submit. Submissions are currently open for translation and art and will be open for all categories in November. All attendees for this night's event will also be entered into a drawing for HFR copies and Jenny Yang Cropp's book, String Theory. Erika Eckart's chapbook, Tyranny of Heirlooms, will also be linked during her reading. It's freely available and we encourage you to read it. If selected for the drawing, you'll be notified in the week following this event. Lastly, and thank you for your patience, please use the chat as a space to celebrate what you hear. Share moving lines or reflections on the conversation. If you'd like to ask a question for the discussion later in the evening, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And just to kind of give a shout out to everyone tuning in, there's 51 people here. If you want to say where you're listening from, it would be fantastic to see that in the chat. So go ahead, go wild. But yes, you're welcome to use the Q&A function at the end of the event when we'll have discussion with everyone. With that, I will turn the virtual microphone over to the person who originated the concept for 1,000 Languages, the director of the Virginia G. Piper Center for Creative Writing and Arizona's inaugural Poet Laureate, Alberto Ríos. Alberto.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and thank you everyone for being a part of this. Whether you're a translator or a reader, you're part of something that I think is quite exciting. I think we're about to change. It's a game changer in the way that we publish and why we publish and where we publish and what does that all mean. You know, there are about 7,100 languages in the world. It's absurd to think that one language somehow holds everything, or that if we're publishing only in English that we're reaching everybody. We're not. There are about 163 languages spoken in the households around the Phoenix area, just Phoenix, 163 languages. The idea behind 1,000 Languages, which I've been talking about for many years now, is simple. When we publish a journal, it doesn't matter if it's a scientific journal or an arts journal or anything else. We publish it to great fanfare, confetti, a new issue, you know, neon, all party, everything. And then almost immediately the next day, as we start to work on the next issue, that journal goes into the dreaded archives. And the archives, traditionally, you can get a greatest hits kind of idea out of it, or you can jump in and do some research. But the truth of it is, it simply sits there. And over time, it sort of sadly gets lonely. Our idea is that as excited as we were when we published each issue, there's no reason for that excitement to wane. We should be equally excited still about what's in there. We don't even go back and know what's in there. I'm not sure we go back and read. We read forward. It's rare that we go back and read the entirety of something backward. So my thought is, how do we do that? How do we make ourselves excited about something that's already been published and it's already extant? Well, the answer, with understanding that there are 7,100 languages in the world, that we're in a new century, that speaking to everybody is an important, a supremely important idea in the world today, is there are I think something like 150 students from about 150 countries at ASU, all speaking in one form or another different languages. Well, if we were to take the archive of Hayden's Ferry, that archive, and translate it into all of the possible languages it can be translated into, that is a huge undertaking, many years, it'll take many years to do, but that's the way to do it, to make ourselves excited about what we've always been excited about, the art that doesn't go sour, it doesn't go sad, it doesn't work that way, it stays alive. And our job is to make it stay alive by speaking it in all the ways we can speak it, by making it a matrix, not just simply a one-dimensional artifact, by helping us understand that complexity is both approachable and perhaps necessary. 7,100 languages, that's a lot of languages, that's a lot of people in the world, 7 billion, whatever it is, people there are now. We want to say, though, at the end of the day, that in Hayden's Ferry review, when we publish, we both publish everyone that we can, that we find it simple, And that when we speak and we help those writers speak, we want to speak to everyone. We don't want to speak to just one group. We want to try our best to reach out with the art that we know is powerful and let it have voice continuing. Let it have voice again. And the way to do that is to look at what different languages are doing with the work. So I'll let it go at that. I love talking about 1,000 languages. I think we're on the precipice, as I said, of something pretty amazing. This will be a story in literature, in the literary field, what we're doing, how we're doing it, who's involved. We've got a lot of ways to get these translations going. And I think it's a sleeping giant. We just simply had to start asking, will you translate? Can you translate? Does it matter to you that this work is in your language? And I think we've gotten an exciting response. We'll keep building. And with that, I will pass it on now to Nicole Arocho Hernández, who will lead some more of the evening. Thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Jackie and Susan Nguyen.
Great, thank you for that, Alberto. Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Nicole. I'm the translations editor for Hayden's Ferry Review, and I'm so happy that I was invited to host this event because translation has a very special place in my heart. And I'm so happy that we're here celebrating this wonderful art. And yeah, we have amazing speakers coming up, and I'm so happy to introduce a few of them now. So we'll first have Jenny, Shahzadi, and Belén join us. Jenny Yang Cropp is an associate professor of English at Southeast Missouri State University and the author of the poetry collection String Theory, a 2016 Oklahoma Book Award finalist, as well as 2 chapbooks, Hanging the Moon and Not a Bird or a Flower. Her poem Oriental, which originally appeared in Hayden's Ferry Review on issue 45 in 2010, has been translated into Spanish, Chinese, and twice into Urdu. We'll be hearing an Urdu translation tonight by Shahzadi Laibah Burq and a Spanish translation by Belén Agustina Sánchez. Shahzadi Laibah Burq is a multilingual speaker of Urdu, English, Persian, Dari, Pashto, and Punjabi. She is currently doing her PhD in applied linguistics at Arizona State University. Belén Agustina Sánchez comes from Buenos Aires, Argentina, where she was a translator and children's and YA's literature editor. Since 2019, she is a PhD student in the Spanish program at the School of International Letters and Cultures. So please help me welcoming Jenny Yang Cropp, who's gonna start us off.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you to everyone who made this project happen. Like Nicole said, the poem was published in 2010, and it was such a joyful surprise to see it sort of come back to life, to see it have a new life, and the way that those translations allow it to have new audiences was really exciting for me. I wrote the poem in grad school in my MFA, so very early poem, and it was a very early publication, like one of my first. It was very exciting for me. So I really appreciate getting to be here tonight. So I'm going to read Oriental. I will say that it's a true story. It was something that happened to me in grad school. And it was one of my first really blatant experiences with microaggression before I even knew what that term was. And so it was also one of the first times I let myself sort of be angry in a poem, but also tried to find some humor in it. So this is Oriental. The Walmart cashier stares at my license, my face, my license again. Doesn't believe that's me in the picture. Eyes slanted because I smiled too much, showed my teeth to the DMV. You look white in real life, she says, and inspects the photo a few more times at different angles, intervals, degrees of light. Oriental, she says, tapping one long fake nail on her proof. She names me, the way we all must name the things we fear. Like she's picked me from a lineup, found me hiding in plain sight. At first, I want to apologize, offer an explanation, blame it on my mother or my father, tell her about dominant and recessive traits, my brother's coarse hair, my sister's eyes, my round face. We can't help what we inherit. The drunk at a party who thought it was safe to pull his eyelids back and mock a Chinese taxi driver. An ex who laughed when I wanted a bicycle and asked if I'd be making deliveries. The Japanese boss who frowned and shook her head when I tried to commiserate. Our ability to hold both sides in our skin makes no sense to them, to this woman who repeats Oriental for emphasis, after I've said I'm half Korean, as if I'm mistaken about which way the sun rises or which direction I face, as if she's sure when she takes my check, I'll go out to the parking lot, untie my dragon, and fly away due east. Thank you. I am now passing the virtual mic, thank you, to Laibah.
Hi, thank you. Thank you. The poem was wonderful. So before I read out Mashriqi for everyone today, I want to talk a little about my background and my experience of translating the poem Oriental. I grew up a polyglot speaking 5 languages, and growing up in a multilingual community, I found myself always curious about how the expression of feelings and sentiments differ across languages and cultures. 5 years ago, when I started my job as a non-native English teacher, at times I struggled with expressing my thoughts in English. As you know, translation is a difficult task, especially when one wants to express one's thoughts and still keep the real essence of it. So when I was translating the poem Oriental by Yang Cropp, the first challenge for me was to capture the subtleties in translation and avoid overexpressing the author's emotions. Something else that I found interesting while translating Oriental was locating similar idioms in Urdu while trying to still keep the flow of the poem. For instance, there is no Urdu equivalent idiom for hiding in plain sight, so I had to create one on my own. Also, I learned that translating a poem can become difficult with regards to sentence breaks, especially when 2 languages have different sentence structures. Sentences in English follow the subject, verb, object pattern, whereas in Urdu, it's written following the subject, object, verb structure. So therefore, to convey the meaning accurately at times, I had to deviate from the sentence structure used in the original poem. Similarly, following the change of tenses was not straightforward, as I was afraid that it might render changes in the meaning. So I had to make adjustments accordingly to keep the meaning intact. What made it possible for me to convey the author's message in Urdu was the shared experience of living as an outsider, coming from a different culture, speaking a different language in the United States. I could relate to every single word in the poem, and thus translating it took me on an emotional journey. I didn't feel like I was translating someone else's thoughts. What I wanted to accomplish by translating this poem into Urdu, that the readers can take a peek into the complex world of people living in Western societies, coming from different backgrounds, and working to make their dreams into realities. So now I'm gonna read Mashriqi for everybody. Mashriqi. वॉलमार्ट की कैशियर दोहराती है, घूरती है मेरे लाइसेंस को, मेरे चेहरे को, फिर से लाइसेंस को, इसे यकीन नहीं आता कि ये मैं ही हूँ। तस्वीर में आंखें खींची हुई हैं, क्योंकि हंसते हुए मैंने कुछ ज्यादा दांत दिखाए थे। तुम लगती हो गोरी असल जिंदगी में, इसने कहा, और फिर मेरी तस्वीर को कई मर्तबा मुख्तलिफ जावियों से, वक्फों से, रोशनी में गौर से देखा। मशरिकी, वो कहती है तस्दीक करते हुए, अपने लंबे नाखून से वो मुझे नाम देती है, कुछ इस तरह जिस तरह हम खौफनाक अशिया को नाम देते हैं, जैसे इसने मुझे किसी फहरिस्त में से ढूंढा हो, पोशीदा मगर आया जगह से। मेरा पहला रद्द अमल ये होता है कि मैं इसे माफी मांगू। कोई वजाहत पेश करूं, इल्जाम दूं अपनी माँ या अपने बाप को, इससे बताऊं गालिब और मखलूक खसलतों के बारे में, मेरे भाई के खुरदरे बाल, मेरी बहन की आंखें, मेरा गोरा चेहरा। हम तब्दील नहीं कर सकते जो हमें विरासत में मिला है। पार्टी में एक मदहोश शख्स ने मुनासिब समझा अपनी पलकें घुमाकर चीनी टैक्सी ड्राइवर का मजाक उड़ाना। एक साबका महबूब जो हंस पड़ा मेरी साइकिल की ख्वाहिश पर और पूछने लगा, क्या अब तुम डिलीवरीज करोगी? मेरा जापानी अफसर के माथे पर बल आ गए जब मैंने हमदर्दी का इजहार किया। ये कुव्वत कि हमारी जिल्द में मशरिक और मगरिब दोनों का इम्तिजाज है मायने नहीं रखती इनके लिए और इस औरत के लिए जो फिर दोहराती है मशरिकी। अपनी बात को वजन देने के लिए जब मैंने कहा मैं आधी कोरियन हूं, जैसे मैं बेखबर हूं सूरज किस सिमत निकलता है या मेरा रुख किस सिमत में है, गोया इसे यकीन है मेरे चेक लेने के बाद मैं बाहर पार्किंग लॉट में जाकर खोल दूंगी अपना ड्रैगन और उड़ जाऊंगी तरफे मशरिक। Well, thank you everyone. Just checking if Belén is here. And if not, I would like to hand over the session back to Nicole.
I'm here. Thank you so much.
Yay, thank you.
That was so musical and magical for someone that doesn't know the language. It was very interesting, a very beautiful experience. Thank you so much. Okay, so I did the Spanish translation, and I'm so happy to see Jenny's face and be able to say hi. I am a grad student. I'm doing my PhD here at ASU, and I got here in 2019. So this translation was very early. When I arrived to the US, I was still in shock. The shock of coming from Argentina to the US lasted a good 2 to 3 years. Let's add a little bit more months because of the pandemic, so a longer shock. It took a while to get to know the community, start to feel safe or even comfortable. So this translation acts for me as a time capsule, because I learned so much since I got here. I used a lot of my background from Buenos Aires, my studies in literary translation, and I was thinking about using the Spanish from Argentina, because you don't read Spanish from Argentina in translations in general. Or I was trying to come up with musicality and rhythm because of my previous because of my preparation. But if I read it now, of course I would have done so many things differently. And that's the thing with translation. It's an ever-changing organism. A text that is translated is going to be ever-changing. It's a documentation of how language is not a fixed thing, how it is an individual characteristic and something that lives within us, and that we have to preserve and love and care. So I'm going to read the Spanish, my Spanish of a grad student, also a newcomer to the US, that participated in this project and felt cared. So I want to say thank you to all of you. Oriental. La cajera del Walmart se queda mirando mi licencia, mi cara, mi licencia de nuevo. No me cree que soy yo en la foto, los ojos achinados porque sonreí demasiado. Le mostré los dientes al DMV. Pareces blanca en la vida real, dice, e inspecciona la foto un par de veces más en diferentes ángulos, intervalos, grados de iluminación. Oriental, dice, golpeteando una larga uña falsa sobre su prueba. Me nombra de la manera en que nombramos a las cosas que tememos, como si me hubiera señalado en una rueda de identificación, descubierto, escondida a simple vista. Primero quiero disculparme, ofrecer una explicación, echarle la culpa a mi padre, a mi madre, contarle sobre los genes dominantes y recesivos, el pelo grueso de mi hermano, los ojos de mi hermana, mi cara redonda. No podemos evitar lo que heredamos. El borracho en una fiesta que pensó que era prudente darse vuelta a las pestañas y burlarse de un taxista chino. Un ex que se rió cuando quise una bicicleta y me preguntó si iba a hacer repartos. La jefa japonesa que frunció el ceño y sacudió la cabeza cuando intenté conmiserarme. Nuestra habilidad para sostener las dos caras en nuestra piel no tiene sentido para ellos, para esta mujer que repite Oriental, para enfatizar luego de que dije que soy mitad coreana, como si yo no supiera por dónde sale el sol o hacia qué dirección estoy mirando, como si estuviera segura de que cuando acepte mi cheque voy a salir al estacionamiento, desatar a mi dragón y salir volando rumbo este. Thank you so much.
Oh, how wonderful to hear a work in 3 different languages, just basking on the soundscapes, the language, the atmospheres that were built, sort of like the difference in all the languages and the similarities. I love it. Thank you so much for those readings. The chat's going wild, love to see it. Okay, we have more amazing readers with us. We're gonna have Erika and Asna join us. Erika Eckart is the author of The Tyranny of Heirlooms, a chapbook of interconnected prose poems, published with Sundress Publications in 2018. Her writing has appeared in Double Room, Agni, Quarter After 8, and elsewhere. She is a high school English teacher in Oak Park, Illinois. Her prose poem, Knuckles, which originally appeared in the HFR issue 48 in 2011, has been translated into Urdu and Spanish. Tonight we'll hear the Urdu translation by Asna Nusrat. Asna Nusrat is a fiction writer in ASU's MFA program, a translator and nonfiction associate editor at Hayden's Ferry Review. Originally from Karachi, Pakistan, she is a bilingual writer who often dabbles in translating to or from Urdu. So please join me in welcoming Erika, who's going to start us off with her reading.
Hello, I want to say thank you so much to everyone who organized this opportunity. I was getting my kiddo ready for something, and I told him I wrote this poem before he was born. He's 12, so that was neat. And yeah, I didn't realize I mean, it was cool when you guys contacted me, but when I read the Spanish translation yesterday, I can sort of read Spanish. I didn't realize how moved I would be about like the word-to-word decisions of changing honey to darling. And it really, I've been in my feelings about it. So I want to say I'm so thankful. Right. Well, without further ado, I will read the poem Knuckles. When her daughter called and said the horse was shaking and his short, sable hair was foamy and iridescent, the mother spoke very deliberately. Get him out of the stall, honey. Whatever you do, get him out of the stall. She didn't tell her why, that if she didn't, and he died in there, rigor mortis would set in, and the renderer would have to break all the bones in the horse's legs to fit him through the door. And that then, like her mother, whenever she heard her father in bed at night idly bending his toes, or someone at the grocery store nervously pulling each finger, or her mother cracked the backbone of a chicken with the weight of her body in a cleaver, she would hear it again. Giant glass knuckles, amplified and repeated and repeated and repeated. And finally, the noise of the broken body, a 1,000-pound bag of still warm lumps being pulled by 3 men over the worn earth.
Asna, when you're ready, you can join us and do the reading of your translation.
Thanks, Nicole, and thanks, Erika, for reading out that very beautiful poem for us. Before I take you all through a very small journey of what doing these translations meant for me, I will read out my version of Knuckles, that's titled Haddiyan. जब उसकी बेटी ने बुलाकर बताया कि घोड़ा कांप रहा है और उसके गर्दन के बाल झागनुमा और चमकदार लग रहे हैं, माँ ने बड़ी संजीदगी से कहा, बेटा उसे बाहर ले आओ, और फिर दोहराया, बस उसे अस्तबल से बाहर ले आओ, बगैर किसी क्यों का जवाब दिए कि अगर उसे बाहर ना लाया गया और वो वहीं मर गया तो बाद अज मर्ग उसका जिस्म आखिरी सांस में अकड़ जाएगा और बाहर निकालना नामुमकिन हो जाएगा। और फिर अंजाम दहिंदे को घोड़े की टांगें तोड़ के हड्डियों के ढेर को बाहर निकालना पड़ेगा। और यूं जब भी वो अपने बाप को रात में बिस्तर में लेटे पैर की उंगलियां मोड़ते, या पंसारी की दुकान पे खड़े किसी गाहक को अपनी उंगलियां चटकते, या मुर्गी की रीढ़ की हड्डी चापड़ के नीचे आते सुनेगी, वो आवाज उसके कानों में दोबारा गूंजेगी, जैसे कांच की उंगलियां एक बार, दो बार, बार बार टूटे। और आखिर वो आवाज जब उस टूटे हुए बेहियत जिस्म के नीम गरम टुकड़े एक मन भर बोरी में बंद 3 आदमी उसी फरसूदा जरर रसीदा जमीन पर घसीटते हुए ले जाएंगे। So that was my translation of Knuckles, and I will quickly do a run through of how I came about to translating this very beautiful poem. And I want to preface this by thanking Erika Eckart for writing images so tight while using language so sharp that I had to literally break the bones of every letter and sound that I knew and bandage the fractured words that I had to come up with to shadow something that Erika has created so beautifully. And I'm also most grateful to the team that enabled me to make this possible. Jackie, the ever supportive mentor, my transcriber, Faisal Bashir, who I hope is in this webinar today, and my readers, Noor, Zain, and my mother, Afshan, who was my transcriber, my reader, and my enabler, and always more devoted to the cause than me. And now to how this experience came about. It's hard to describe what translating Knuckles was like. If it was only about finding Urdu alternatives to the nouns and verbs, it might have been less challenging. But to extract the exact sentiment out of the lines, such as, if he died in there, rigor mortis would set in and the renderer would have to break all the bones to fit him through the door, or be as specific as the image of a mother cracking the backbone of a chicken with the weight of her body and a cleaver, was where the challenge lied. Rigor mortis is not a condition people generally talk about over coffee. So naturally, I had to do a lot of digging and educating to understand what it meant. And unless the translator has experienced secondhand death as it freezes the body of the deceased in the final moments, I believe it's impossible to really understand what this means. There's a tradition we follow in our culture, which is to straighten the limbs of a person who has just died and firmly tie their ankles together, their arms by their side and secured to the waist, and the crown adjusted to face up with eyes closed. The idea is to honor and prepare the body in the most disciplined stance before it freezes into reluctance. It is to make them look most presentable when they appear before their God and meet estranged loved ones on the other side. So for me, understanding rigor mortis meant translating the ordeal of moving that horse, the once lived doll, as still warm lumps filled in a bag and dragged out on the ground. As a translator, it is important to me to understand the original experience in its own language and transfer that knowledge into Urdu in a way that feels like it belongs. And smaller details also, like the choice of articles, the use of the for the weight of her body and for the cleaver, can again not be ignored because it tells me that the body commanded this action, whereas the cleaver only enacted the orders. So it's the choices like these tied in with larger dilemmas of translating form and meter in Urdu, because in both languages they operate very differently, and shifting text alignment from the left margins to the right, and most of all, working the transcribers to accommodate every single edit every single time you sat down to revise was hard. And I think that's the only thing that can best summarize my experience of translations. That said, I hope I was able to serve justice to poetry and prose to honor them and their language, and to also honor the legacy of my language as I work to bridge the gap between the two. And as I have said in my translator's note that I hope you'll find time someday to go over, to endure the centuries it takes to travel from the left margin of the page to the right. Thank you for having me read and share my experience of translations. And thank you to the rest of us who are here with us today. Back to you, Nicole.
Amazing. Wow. I love that we can hear from the translators on their process and like the attention, the detail, the effort. It's incredible. Kudos to all the translators and their hard work. And that we have the space to hear that too. Amazing. Okay, we have more. So now we have our final group of readers. And we have Laura and Gina. Our final set of translations are Jacqueline Deutsch's short story Drink, which appeared in Hayden's Ferry Review issue 48 in 2010. This story has been translated on the 1,000 Languages site into Spanish, Greek, Romanian, and Turkish. Unfortunately, Jacqueline couldn't attend today, but allowed us to read her work during this event. We'll hear the opening paragraph in English and translation excerpts in Spanish by Laura Dicochea, and in Romanian and Greek by Gina Scarpete Walters. Laura Dicochea is a second-year PhD student in the School of Transborder Studies. Her work focuses on transnationals from Mexico in secondary levels and higher education. Gina Scarpete Walters is a PhD student in comparative culture and language at Arizona State University, where she also serves as a graduate teaching associate of linguistics. Her research interests lie primarily in the area of cognitive linguistics and cultural linguistics. So please help me to welcome Laura, who's going to start us off.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I greatly appreciate it. And yes, I'm going to start with Jacqueline Deutsch's Drink, and I'm going to read in English, and then I'm going to do the second paragraph in Spanish. So the water tastes different here. In my country, water is more like metal, sharp and rusty, swallowed only after some effort. It is sometimes dark, almost the color of honey. But in my new country, the people seem unsurprised at water's transparency, as if it isn't supposed to have any color at all. They drink with such arrogance as if they think water never runs out. Mi madre en sus cartas escribe que debería encontrar a nuestros antiguos vecinos, los que dejaron el viejo país hace mucho tiempo. Ellos serían capaces de enseñarme los pequeños mercados que están en las calles sucias en donde podré comprar las bebidas que tomamos. Pero las cartas tardan mucho en llegar y para cuando las recibo ya no tienen importancia. Empiezo a tomar en cuenta las órdenes de mi madre como meras sugerencias. Empiezo a beber esta nueva agua que huele a vapor y sabe a nada. Y yo ya empiezo a sentir algunos cambios en mí. Mi piel empieza a tornarse clara y ahora entiendo el por qué la piel morena no es tan común aquí. Mi cabello ha adelgazado, mis rizos empiezan a convertirse en ondas más sedosas. La gente parece sonreírme más. Thank you. And I thought when I translated Jacqueline Deutsch's Drink, it was very, very emotional story. I feel I am a transnational student, and been going back and forth from the US, and sometimes we tend to get assimilated into a different culture, right? And I also want to talk about some of the challenges that I faced in this translating this piece. In Jacqueline Deutsch's story, she does not specify what the receiving, the home or the receiving country, right? And still the home country remains a mystery. So when I was translating everything into Spanish, it felt like everything was falling into place, just because, I mean, there is lexical and semantic equivalents in Spanish. However, not on this line. For example, it talks about it says his fingers were so white and soft as dough. And I actually thought, oh, this man must be sweet like dough. So I'm thinking about dough. Yes, it is sweet, but from me being Mexicana, Mexican, and thinking about my mother in the kitchen making tortillas or bread or pan, and me, you know, as a little child eating the dough, I'm thinking it wasn't sweet to me, right? So then I'm trying to find like this equivalent to a Hispanic Mexican audiences, since our proximity to the border. But then I'm thinking, you know what? No, maybe in her home country, the dough is sweet. So it really made me wonder. It really took me abroad. So instead of domesticating the text, I decided to foreignize it and then just keep it. Sometimes, you know, foreignizing the text can be criticized for sounding rare, but I feel like no one, if I were to try to adapt it to a Mexican audience. And I asked everywhere, I asked my mom, I'm like, tell me about something that it's similar to dough, that it's sweet. But I was like, you know what? In the end, I decided to just leave it like that. And maybe it is sweet in her country. And I would love to see her today to ask her about how dough tastes. And I would love to try it. So that was one of my biggest challenges. Such a small, I mean, just a sentence that took me a lot of research and thought and consultation with others on how would I translate that. And then now I will pass this to Gina.
Thank you, Laura, for sharing. I had the same challenges, by the way. So good evening or good morning, everyone. Again, I'd like to thank Jackie and everyone else who helped you put together this beautiful event that gives us the opportunity to share our experience as interns of TLP. I was so happy when this project was launched a few years ago, because translation, as it is mentioned in the description of this project on the website, is first and foremost a social necessity. And why is that? Well, in simple words, because it brings us all together, it brings the world together. At the same time, it helps us all to be more, empathetic and understanding of the cultural differences. It helps us easily navigate the differences between the various cultures and languages. At the same time, it widens our perspectives. So I would say that translations and interpreting are really essential, if not crucial, for intercultural communication, functioning as what's already a cliche, a window to different cultural worlds. So before continuing with my presentation, I would like to read first the translations. Romanian first. Pe măsură ce mă pregăteam de întâlnirea noastră, am petrecut câteva minute studiindu-mă în oglindă. Dacă mama m-ar fi putut vedea, mi-ar fi spus că sunt o încrezută. Pe gât aveam o aluniță ca o pată de cerneală din care răsăreau câteva fire aspre de păr. Rar vedeam semnul ăsta pentru că purtam de obicei cămăși cu guler înalt și de fiecare dată când mă dezbrăcam, priveam cu grijă în pământ, evitând singura oglindă din spațiul mic în care locuiam. Dar asta era o noapte specială. Am vrut să port o rochie nouă care îmi lăsa umerii la vedere. O cumpărasem chiar în ziua aia de la un magazin la mâna a doua, de lângă facultate, aproape imediat după ce zâmbărețul ăsta mi-a dat drumul la mână. O găsisem la reducere, norocul meu. Când însă am probat rochia și am văzut alunița, un semn cu care mă născusem și care refuza să dispară în ciuda cantităților de apă pe care le băusem, mi-am spus că totul va fi pierdut. Am încercat să îmi amintesc dacă mai văzusem vreo femeie în țara asta cu un asemenea semn pe gâturile lor de un roz pal, o minge neagră ca a mea, cu fire mici de păr răsărind din ea. Nu mai văzusem. And the next paragraph will be from the Greek translation. Κοίταξα στα συρτάρια του μπάνιου μου για ένα τσιμπιδάκι. Το μόνο που βρήκα ήταν μια καρφίτσα ασφαλείας. Την έφερα μαζί μου στον καθρέφτη και κοιτάζοντας κατευθείαν τα μάτια μου, ξεκίνησα να τρυπάω το δέρμα μου, τυλίγοντας τις τρίχες γύρω από την αιχμηρή βελόνα. Τις έβγαλα. Ακούμπησα την καρφίτσα απαλά στο δέρμα μου, αλλά και πάλι αιμορραγούσα. Ο πόνος δεν ήταν πολύ έντονος, αλλά με έκανε να δακρύσω. Δεν είχα κλάψει από τότε που έφτασα σε αυτή τη χώρα, οπότε όταν τα δάκρυα άγγιξαν το στόμα μου, η γεύση με ξάφνιασε. Αύριο θα γράψω ένα γράμμα στη μητέρα μου να της εξηγήσω πόσο διαφορετικό είναι το κλάμα εδώ. Της αρέσει να της περιγράφω τις διαφορές μεταξύ των δύο εθνών. Θα της πω ότι όταν αυτοί κλαίνε, το νερό μετατρέπεται στα σώματά τους από άγευστο σε πικάντικο. Αλλά με κάποιον τρόπο εξακολουθεί να έχει καθαρή γεύση. Καθόλου όπως συμβαίνει όταν εμείς κλαίμε. Στην περίπτωσή μας, το νερό βγαίνει έτσι όπως μπήκε, βρώμικο. Στο γράμμα δεν θα της πω πως το σώμα μου έχει αλλάξει, πως τα δάκρυα μου έχουν τώρα μια καθαρή γεύση, πως κάθε μέρα γίνομαι όλο και περισσότερο σαν αυτούς. Πόσο διψασμένη είμαι πάντα. Θα βάλω το γράμμα σε ένα κουτί, μαζί με ένα μπουκάλι νερό, από τη νέα μου πατρίδα και εύχομαι να το πιει η μητέρα μου. Awesome, thank you. Okay, so continuing with the presentation. So I'm so happy I'm going last because my presentation has a theoretical approach, so I feel that it's somehow synthesizing everything that everyone has shared before. So I have a master's degree in translation and interpreting studies with an emphasis on modern Greek and Romanian. And I remember that during my studies, one of the things that I found to be the most fascinating was having to translate the untranslatable. And as students of translation, we had to work with a large variety of texts. And of course, as you can imagine, literary texts, both poetry and prose, are of course the most challenging. So now it is very important to understand that in the translation process, the translation unit is the discourse, not the word. Because if the translation unit would have been the word, this would have implicated that for every word in a language, there should exist a perfect equivalent in other languages. And I'm afraid that's not the case. So in other words, the way the word is treated by lexicographers, by dictionary makers in dictionary as a component of a lexicon is completely different than how the word is used in a given context. This means that us translators are usually concerned with the word as a component of a sentence. So touching a bit on this concept of untranslatability, I would say that it doesn't necessarily imply that there are words that cannot be translated at all. In fact, it does refer to those contexts that usually challenge a translator. And this is like linguistic differences or kind of cultural gaps. Now, there are three forms of known untranslatability, and these are linguistic, cultural, and ideological. And I will only be touching on the first two, linguistic and cultural. And what leads to the linguistic untranslatability? And now in simple words, the differences in the source language and the target language. Like these differences can relate to various factors like phonology, morphology, syntax, lexicology, semantics. Think about metaphors, idiomatic expressions, all kind of proverbs, all kind of sayings, all kind of culture-specific lexical units. Like if I'm not wrong, for instance, I remember that Chinese has, for instance, no tenses, but only 3 aspects. The English verb to be has no direct equivalent in Chinese. And I also want to bring up here an example of multiple equivalence from one of the other texts I translated. I also saw in the audience Alexis Strata, and I'm so happy they are here. So going back to my translator note, I remember that I talked there about an example of multiple equivalence. And what is multiple equivalence? It's that situation where the source language has one word for which there are 2 or more equivalents in the target language. And the example was the Romanian word dor. Dor is also very culture-specific word in Romanian. It conveys a culture-specific way of feeling, the meaning of which seems to be almost impossible to translate into other languages. Now, if you're looking into a Romanian English bilingual dictionary, this word would be translated as longing, melancholy, or homesickness. But in reality, the concept of dor is much more complex to us natives. And this culture specificity, unfortunately, is not registered in the bilingual dictionaries. Just to give you a few other examples, Door in English could also be earning for something or after something. Can also be hanker for something, grief, sorrow, desire, want, thirst, hunger, urge, wish, appetite, lust. It's overwhelming, isn't it? So in reference to the Romanian translation of Alexis Stratton's The Interpreter, the Romanian translation of to miss someone or something into door somehow managed to enhance the quality of the message, creating a more powerful image. And another example that I would like to share from this time Ciudelia Eudocia's Drink, towards the end of the text, she uses in the same sentence, meeting versus date. Now, you know, as English speakers, meeting is more general. You can meet family, you can meet strangers, co-workers, friends, but date has a romantic nature attached to it. And in Romanian, we do not make this distinction at all. So what I did then in Romanian was to write it in italics, emphasizing this way that it isn't any meeting, but our meeting, you know, my meeting with him. Now, in terms of cultural untranslatability, that's the second type of untranslatability. This usually occurs when, of course, languages do not share a similar cultural background, and this happens all the time. And such differences are more visible when it comes to food culture, family dynamics. Now, a good example of such cultural untranslatability I can think of is the fact that Swedish, Norwegian, and Dutch, I don't know if any of you knows that, they have different terms for paternal grandparents and different terms for maternal grandparents. That's really interesting because in English, we don't make these differences. In the languages I'm familiar with, we don't make this distinction either. So then it is quite important to understand that culture in its broadest sense refers to everything that encompasses knowledge, morals, art, beliefs, customs, all kind of superstitions, stereotypes, so many other things and habits acquired by an individual as a member of society. So therefore, translation plays an important role in the cultural exchange between people who speak different languages. And I really want to mention here Eugene Nida, who is a famous American linguist and also one of the founders of the modern discipline of translation studies. And in one of his works from a few years ago, he claimed that the activity of translation is much more complex than it may first appear. And we all agree with this, right? And for a translation to be successful, I quote, being familiar with two cultures is even more important than mastering two languages because the language has its meaning only in the cultural background. So now, the question is, how do we manage to overcome these challenges? How do we manage to fill these gaps as translators? Of course, through the well-known method of compensation. In order to compensate for such gaps, translators utilize special techniques such as adaptation, borrowing, calque, footnotes or endnotes, as well as I think it was another one, paraphrase, which again is a very, very common technique. So in ending, I would like to just touch just a little bit on what I believe the role of translator should be. I believe that a translator's purpose should not be to make the targeted audience feel at home, but instead to make it leave its home. Thank you so much, guys.
Wow, there's so much knowledge, so much being shared. I've taken so many notes during this event. You've all been my teachers as a translator myself. I've learned so much tonight. So thank you all for sharing all your work, for the translators for sharing their process in putting together these incredible pieces in all these wonderful languages that we've been blessed to hear and read if you can today. Okay, that's all for our readers tonight. Thank you all. We have now time for our Q&A. You can feel free to drop questions into the Q&A in your Zoom. I don't see any questions right now, so please feel free to drop some questions in there. I'd love to get to them. We have a good amount of time to get through a few questions from our audience. I have a question that I'll use to kick us off as people drop in some questions. I know that our translators sort of talked a little bit about their process with these specific pieces. I wonder if any of our translators would like to speak more about their sort of overall process, if there's something else that they'd like to share about translation and how they sort of go about it. And also about the sort of ethical concerns that you might think about as you're going through the process of translating, and sort of how you approach the text with care and consideration. So yeah, if any of our panelists would like to jump in, feel free.
I would love to jump in. Thank you so much. I was listening, Gina, very carefully, and what you are saying, right? This ethics and this idea of how to approach translation. And it's interesting that Gina was thinking about nida. I don't know why in Argentina we were saying nida. I guess we were treating it as French. This idea of equivalence, this idea that translation studies is a field that it's still growing, right? We have to remember that translation studies grew up, was created, or it's all the time translators were thinking about their task all the time, right? So when you go to a translation studies seminar or class, you're gonna be faced with this many texts about translation. And there are so many discussions and there are so many theories, and the translation studies field is growing. ASU has this translation studies certificate. It's new, it's being built and rebuilt and renamed. And what we have to always remember is that translation studies as a field, right? It grew and it started from thinking about how to translate the Bible. It has to do with the human experience. It has to do with religion. It has to do also with institutions. It has to do with what we communicate to whom, to build what. What do I want to build? When I was saying that my experience changed so much since that girl that came here in 2019, and this woman that you see today, so many years after, what I experienced here is, first I learned about US Spanish. I didn't know it existed. Then I learned about how to be a good heritage speaker, professor, how to teach Spanish to people that already speak Spanish at home. But what I'm doing as a professor in the heritage program is allowing the space and the room for people to use the Spanish that was meant to be only used at home in the family, because we're trying to assimilate, right? Because America is English only, you know? What's going on with Arizona and the schools? So all this new things that I learned from being here, from living in the borderlands, from meeting Laura, from meeting all these students, the ASU experience. So yeah, Eugene has a lot of important points for us, right? And this idea of something that cannot be translated and all that. Perfect, but we can and we will translate everything. And this experience, what we are doing today is it's a way of bringing the periphery to the center. And here I'm thinking about Casanova or the police systems theory, this idea that we are in a world of our own. We are creating world with the translations, and that poem from 2019 in the Argentinian Spanish, translated by someone that had to leave Argentina and her culture to live in the US and create a new life. That's one little speck of dust in this great world that we are starting to create via translations. So we always, like, we don't have to take our translations so seriously because they are going to always change, but we have to take them very seriously because we're creating worlds with them. So that's what I wanted to add. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you, Belén. I wonder if anybody else wanted to jump in from our panelists on this question. Okay, that's fine too. That's fine. We're fine. Just checking in. We're getting some cues in the Q&A. Thank you for that. Before we move to the questions in the Q&A, I wonder if our panelists, readers, if you have questions for each other or comments for each other. I'd like to make some room for that. Okay, that's fine too. And if you come up with something, just let me know in the chat or jump in. But I wanted to make sure we had room for that as well. Okay, all right, so Q&A questions, here we go. We have a question for all the translators. Have you ever thought of writing your own pieces beside translating? So for our translators, do you do your own writing? Maybe you want to speak a little bit about the difference between the writing and the translating.
I can share. I do write. I've been writing for a few years poetry and a little bit of prose, but I wouldn't dare to send for publication. I would need to build up a lot of courage to do that. But yes, it is completely different because when you are, I mean, when you are writing your own pieces, you are free. When you are translating, you have to make sure that you don't end up with a different book, with a different piece. You have to take into consideration the ethics of translation, not ruining the writer's reputation, you know, not ruining the original writing. So yes, as a translator, you have to be much more responsible. As a writer, you are free.
Asna, did you want to share as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, and full confession here, translations came to me after I was doing a bit of my own writing, and I would completely agree with Gina there. With your own writing, granted, there are many other hurdles and loops you have to jump through, but you're freer. There's greater liberty of using language the way you'd want to. But with translations, it becomes a lot more cultural, a lot more racial, a lot more political, national, and with keeping all of those notions and those big terms in mind, the exercise of writing or enacting translations or transferring an experience or a legacy from one language to another without discounting either of those languages and paying full respect to both, it does become a more taxing task. And because I am a fiction writer, most of my work is, if always only in English, still a translation of an experience from Urdu to English, so that spirit of translation never really dies when I am writing. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Asna. The way that you spoke about the spirit of translation still being there, since you're moving your thoughts or your experiences still from Urdu to English, really resonated with me as someone who Spanish is their first language. I have a similar experience. Perfect. Another question. How did you all take into account specific culture instances in your translations? I know that a lot of you already spoke about this, but if anybody else wanted to jump in to talk about culture in the translation process.
I can talk a little bit about it and kind of talk about like, you know, what Gina also mentioned. But usually what I did, I took Venuti's stance on foreignization, which like really influenced my decision as a translator when I was talking about the dough, how it was sweet. And usually foreignization is a strategic cultural intervention which seeks to send the reader abroad. So what it really does, it makes the receiving culture aware of like this linguistic and cultural differences that are inherent in the text. So like I said, even, you know, the home country of Cidelia Doci in the story was unknown. I didn't want to really remove her identity or her foreign identity, but like really highlight it in the text. So it really, like I said, again, when I'm doing this translation and taking a few translation classes during my grad school, like really helped me into making these decisions, because I feel like even like before, I would have completely domesticated the text. And it's okay, sometimes, you know, we do that, but it's so important. Like, you know, I started thinking about like my process of, you know, the translation and like me reading this short story and how it did send me abroad. I was like wondering where her home country was from. It really inspired me to look her more into her background. It was really hard to find information. I remember she was being very challenging to find and get a hold of and contact to get her permission to translate. But yeah, it really opened up like, you know, opened me up to her culture. And yeah, I think it was a beautiful experience and beautiful short story too.
Great, thank you for that, Laura. Okay, we'll go to the next question. This one's about writing process. In the writing process, do you have in mind a global audience and strive for universal language, or is writing a more personal and unique experience?
I think it says, do writers have in mind a global audience? This is a really interesting question. It makes me think of two things. First, self-censorship, which started to be very common among those authors that want to find success fast. And I don't know if you are familiar with the term literary Starbucks. So first, I'm going to touch a bit on the self-censorship aspect. Is mostly exercised by the writers themselves, of course, that's why it's called self-censorship. Those who, in trying to adhere to the values and principles of the foreign targeted audience, they create an intentionally translatable style in their original language to make it easier to convey to a foreign literary audience. So basically, in the process of writing, such writers end up removing cultural specific elements. They erase elements of the history of their nation with the goal of making it more attractive to the foreign readership. So when you want to achieve international success on a competitive market, what do writers do? What do we all do? We compromise. And this trend has been termed literary Starbucks, where publishers are seeing writers adopting like more neutral language and avoiding cultural idioms in order to appeal to these like foreign readers and editors. So this is what I had to share.
Thank you, Gina. Erika, you wanted to share something as well?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think to be effective as a writer, you have to try to be as specific as possible, and that's how to get general understanding. Like you have to speak to your specific experience. And sometimes even when I think I'm being broad, in my writing group, there's a I'm in my 40s, and there's a just turned 30-year-old white man kind of from the academy, who's one of my good friends, who's in my writing group, and he will often be like, I have no idea what this is. And then I'm like, oh, wow, I thought that was universal, but it was actually inherent to just my experience. I think it's important to writing to not try to make it too universal and keep to specificity. And that's where we can like learn the most about each other through our texts. What do you guys think?
I'm going to jump in, but I'm still sort of formulating my response. So I was thinking about that idea that everything is, all writing is translation, because when I teach writing poetry, I talk about it as translation a lot of times, that you have this experience in your head or in your body, and you're trying so hard to find a way to express it. And I feel like I'm constantly struggling just with English as my only language to figure out how it works and how to convey the things that I want to convey. And so I don't think I've ever thought about it as being universal in any way. Definitely more on the personal side, but always with some attempt to at least get somebody out there to get as close to my experience as possible. But I find that in that, I was really interested in that discussion about sort of the gaps that exist, because I feel like that's the same struggle I have with English, that there's always this massive gap between what it is I want to say and the limitations of the language. And so then I think it's interesting that there might be this gap for me, and then this another gap, right, when it's translated into another language, and then another gap and another gap. And I think that's very interesting. And so I would say for me as a poet, I'm not trying to be universal necessarily, but I am trying to communicate, which does require thinking about how other people might interpret it.
Thank you, Jenny. Gina, did you want to add something else? No? Okay, it happens. I thought you had your hand raised. This is so interesting, this conversation. It made me think of sort of the pressure of publishing and the effects of that too in writers, and the ways that like the market, right, could influence the ways that we write or present our work. And it makes me think of academia too, the ways that could sort of create a language, right? Or show us like a language, right? That's what we're pushed to use, or the sort of approaches that we're taught with the writing. Very, very interesting. Could talk about it more and more. But we have more questions. So another question that we have is, did you feel the poems took on a new life or meaning after translation? Laibah, please jump in.
Hi, so I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about is related directly to the poem took a new meaning, but I just realized it's a sudden realization when Jenny was reading the poem. When she was reading it, it's her poem that she wrote in English, but since I spent so much time translating it and living those emotions and expressions, and I would like translate it, go back and sleep, translate it, and it just like carried on for like months when I was doing it, I just felt like I have lived those experiences. And like when I read my version, even though it's not what I have lived, those old experiences, they just like the movie goes in my head where it's like I have lived it over time, and I am speaking, like even though I'm the translator, I am the writer, and I own those emotions and experiences. So in a way, it did like took a life of its own when I was translating it.
Did anybody else want to jump in on this question? All right, cool. We have one more question in our Q&A. If people in the audience still have questions, drop them in the Q&A. If they go in the chat, they can get lost, so please drop them in the Q&A feature. What was one breakthrough moment in the specific translations, one major personal moment of working with the text?
I'm going to say something about Alexis Stratton's text, because I remember I struggled a lot translating The Interpreter. And I remember that I even sent emails to Alexis a few times with questions. I couldn't understand. I mean, the way I translate text is to read the original text 10, 15 times until I start feeling the text, and I couldn't feel who was the voice behind the story, who was the narrator. So I had to email Alexis and ask him who is speaking. Is it a man or is it a woman? I couldn't make this distinction. I couldn't understand what was the voice there. And it was very important to me to figure out this aspect, because both in Romanian and in Greek, we have gender markings on adjectives, on participles, on everything. So in order to be able to translate those adjectives with the right gender in my language, I needed to know, is it a woman or is it a man? And this was like really, really difficult for me to figure out. So thank you, Alexis, for clarifying that aspect for me. It's really helped in the translation process, because unfortunately we don't have this they, them in all the languages. And that's really a struggle when you have to translate from English to languages that mark the gender everywhere.
I just am I cutting someone off?
No.
Okay, I would just jump in to say a little thing about another piece that I translated that was originally written by Katie Ferris, Politics of Metamorphosis. And my breakthrough moment was when I sat down. So after having translated the entire piece, I left the hardest part for the end, which was the title, Politics of Metamorphosis. So in my search for the right word for politics in Urdu, I had to, I think, approach 10 different kinds of people, all of whom had different areas of expertise in the language, all of whom were doing different things with the language. And none of them was able to come up with a word that could substitute what politics meant in that context. So politics, if it's literally translated in Urdu, means the governance, the politicians who are holding public office, but that is not what we're talking about here. So the turbulence, the complexities, the unrest, the discomfort that you think of when you hear politics in English is what I wanted to capture in my title of the piece, which is why I had to change it completely. And this makes me think of how Gina was talking about discourse, I think, as the lexical unit that you're aiming to translate rather than the word unit. And that was a major breakthrough moment for me, that if this word is resisting so much to be literally and accurately translated, maybe it's demanding that I do something different with it, that I come up with a new word, with new language to really evoke what I'm trying to express here.
Belén, did you want to jump in?
I just wanted to say this idea of decisions, and sometimes the translator has to run out of their house or their room and just go and ask for help and questions. And that's also a decision. Who are you going to ask? That's something that I was thinking about while I was listening to everyone speaking, right? How many decisions we have to make, and that's an agency. That's pure agency. So translation as agency, I think, is also another metaphor that we can add.
Translation as agency. I love it. Gotta go in my notes. Laibah, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in and just like take from where Belén left is like decisions. And when she was talking about decision, reminded me a breakthrough moment for me was the unimaginable possibilities order, like when you're picking and choosing, and especially like in Urdu, we have like different, it's like a very vast language, and like it has different, I think, hierarchies, like formal, informal, but there's like different kinds that you can translate it into. And I kept asking myself where to go, like how much formal, how much informal, like, so that was a big breakthrough where I was like, just like choosing which word would like be the best in this given situation. So yeah, that was something.
Wonderful. I love this conversation. It makes me think a lot about the collaborative nature of translation, even if you don't like contact a writer or you still contact other folks about language decisions, or friends, or beloveds, or even with the text, your collaboration with that text itself, right? Which is something that I really love about translation, that collaborative aspect of it. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So we have a question. Do you notice a difference in translation styles or decisions depending on the gender of the translator? Please go ahead.
Yeah, so it just came out where the first thing that I had to decide was to pick gender for the poem that I was translating. So Oriental was like written, like you cannot guess the gender of the person in there. So like because it was written by Yang Cropp, I had to go back and just base my decision off of the writer of the poem. So that's how I did it, because Urdu in itself like is again a gendered language. So I had to specify a gender translating that poem. So that was like one of the first few decisions that I had to make. So yeah.
Yeah, and I can talk about the other translation that I did, which it was The Writer as Witness, which it was by Demetria Martinez. And it was so challenging to decide, should I do La Escritora como Testigo or Una Escritora como Testigo? So like that definite article, I went back and forth so many times, and I finally decided to go with La Escritora como Testigo. And then the class, she taught a class here that I was called Writer as Witness. So I didn't really translate that part, because if anybody wanted to like look back and see what the class was all about, then I left that there. But it was mainly the title that I did have a hard time with that definite article and gender. But yeah, it can be very challenging when it comes to gender in Spanish. So.
I'm gonna jump in here and close out tonight. I'm overwhelmed. I'm blown away. I had high expectations for tonight because I knew what wonderful work you've already done. But this is just incredible, and I really appreciate it. Everyone who's made this happen, and I want to continue to celebrate your words. So if you're listening in, please check out thousandlanguages.asu.edu to read the full pieces that were shared here, and many more that are excellent. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Nicole, for moderating this wonderful discussion. All our translators and our returning authors, Jenny and Erika. yeah, I mean, probably like a blast from the past for you to be joining HFR so long after its original publication. So, so thrilled you could be with us tonight. Again, we're thrilled to celebrate you and our translators. Please check out issues 1 and 2 in their entirety, again at thousandlanguages.asu.edu. And join us for our second component of the Fall Language Series next week on November 1st for the HFR Coffee Chat. You will also be receiving a brief survey to offer some feedback on this experience, so thank you in advance for filling it out. And that's it. Have a great night. Take care, stay safe, and bye everyone. Thank you so much.